Hello and welcome to The Comic Cave. I'm Ramsey, aka Captain Away, and today I'm looking at the 2018 to 2019 series, Man-Eaters. In the far-off yesteryear of 2016, thriller novel writer Chelsea Cain was invited by Marvel Comics to write a new series focused around their character Mockingbird in her first ever solo title. Cain was paired with artist Kate Niemczyk and colorist Rochelle Rosenberg, and together the group created what was definitely one of the most fun, unique, and refreshing comics I've seen from Marvel in a long time. And this is coming from someone who's kind of a diehard Marvel fan. Unfortunately, then this happened. This cover, that should probably seem completely innocuous, lit the internet on fire from angry people who apparently don't know what jokes are, and thought this was Marvel legitimately announcing a feminist agenda. Which, so what if they were anyway? I doubt their comics would really change all that much. Marvel caved to pressure and Mockingbird was cancelled, and the team of Cain, Niemczyk, and Rosenberg was broken up forever. Or really more like maybe a few months? Because before long, the trio was making a new comic, which would become 2018's Man-Eaters from Image Comics. A comic, I kid you not, where women would turn into were-panthers when they had their period. Yeah, that's not a joke. That's really what this comic is about. I am really doing this to myself. Yeah, let's just take this away. The comic opens with a tampon dressed up as a superhero. Yep, that's literally the first page of the comic. I really like that I can show people just this page as a gauge of how much you might like this comic. Does this page make you want to dive on in and read more of this comic? Yes? Congratulations, you passed the test. You're not a terrible person. What do you mean you didn't know this was a test? Everything's a test, duh. The plot to this series is pretty simple, honestly. It follows this young girl named Maud, who's currently at the fine line between teen and preteen, in a world, as I mentioned, where menstruation turns people into panthers. As panthers, they would go wild and sometimes even kill their entire family. Once it became known that this was happening, there was massive public outcry and a political movement to eliminate menstruation from ever occurring again. This was achieved by pumping estrogen and progesterone into the water supply. With enough of these hormones in their bodies, women weren't having periods anymore. So, women and girls of the right age group are carefully monitored and regularly examined to help ensure they're not at risk. And if anything is suspected, the girls might just be treated like wild animals already. I mean, she has a Bitch Planet poster, that's pretty suspicious. Girls are also required to drink tap water as often as possible, leading to them even having their own public drinking fountains. Some might see this image as uncomfortably equivocating racism and sexism, but I don't. Yes, it's obviously recalling to mind images of the Jim Crow South, and yes, it's kind of ignoring the experiences of black women who actually did already have to put up with this kind of discrimination on top of dealing with sexism, but the point is really to be ridiculous. The idea here, I think, is not to actually present the idea that sexism is equivalent to racism, but to point out how easy it is to fall into the trap of rationalizing and accepting these levels of discrimination. The kinds of things that brought around Jim Crow laws in the first place, especially when you're in denial of the reality that things could get this bad. This whole comic is about perception versus reality anyway. Straight from the beginning, and I'm talking literally the first few pages of the first issue, when main character Maud talks about her dad, she shows the different perceptions of who he is. Like how she could imagine him like a TV version of himself, or him at his lowest point, or him how he basically actually looks. This theme runs throughout the whole comic, presenting everything through the filter that is this main character's perception. So this could not even be how the sink is really supposed to look, just how she feels about it as an angry young girl being commanded to be left out of a large portion of society. So you may ask me, isn't this a ridiculous image? And I will answer, yes. A comic where girls turn into panthers when they have their periods has some ridiculous imagery in it. Yeah, I know. I was shocked too. Boys, meanwhile, are encouraged to protect their precious testosterone levels by hanging out in female-free safe zones, drinking estrogen-free water, and using estrogen-fighting hand sanitizer and wet wipes. Fun math fact, the hand wipes smell like Cheetos. Cheetos. Excuse me. Where was I? Oh yeah, so that brings us back around to our main character. Maud and her middle school friends decide, hey, we ain't gonna take it anymore, and decide to free their bodies of the government's scary overload of hormones by using the boys' estrogen-free hand sanitizers and drinking their estrogen-free water, conveniently available in bottle form with multiple flavors called Estropop. Which to me sounds like a name implying it does have estrogen, but oh well. As Maud says, it didn't start out as a revolution, but before long they were all doing it. And so before long, Maud seems to be having her first period. Oh, sorry, wrong use of period. I gotta organize these images better, I guess. No. There we go. As we discover Maud is in the midst of her "It's me, Margaret" mode, we also learn that there was a nearby giant cat attack, which is how they refer to werepanther attacks. Her father works for the local Portland police, which is why he has a beard and wears biking shorts so he can bike to work. As you can see from this helpful chart, he's into the X-Files, sports, puzzles, and saying lots of very dad things. They really expand on the things Dad says later when he gives a full list of all of his important survival skills. Holy wall of text, Batman. I couldn't possibly read all this for the video. It would take the whole video. But it is very important that I point out that he has this bit completely backwards. You obviously only need to watch the Monster of the Week episodes and can skip the mythology episodes entirely. Except maybe musings of a cigarette-smoking man. That's an important survival tip. Remember that. So Maud's dad goes to investigate the attack, but when they realize it's a cat attack, they're forced to call in the experts. The Strategic Cat Apprehension Team, or SCAT for short. Yeah, a scat joke. But also it's definitely a direct jab at S.H.I.E.L.D., so I guess I can kind of forgive it. This time. I really enjoy how the intern, in typical lack of respect to interns, doesn't even get to actually make it into this picture. And the big animal vet depicted here, turns out, is Maud's mom. As you can see from this handy dandy chart, she's into what seems to be Chelsea Cain's favorite wine, references to their Mockingbird series, and wait, Winona Earp? Come on, nobody watches Winona Earp. What? What's that? 4 seasons? What the? She's also really, really bad at naming things, which is why they ended up with a hamster named Penguin, a male cat named Girl Cat, a daughter named Maud, and how Scat ended up with an entire troop of corgis. Oh, look at the corgis. With ridiculous names like Carol, Amy Pond, and Burt Reynolds. Although, real talk, I'm obviously naming my corgi Spider-Man when I get a corgi. When Mom and Dad got divorced, Mom left home to join SCAT, largely explaining Dad's dislike for the agency. So the police begin to work with SCAT and their absolutely adorable troop of corgis. Oh, look at the corgis. In hunting down the cat responsible for the attack. The cat's trail ends at a bunch of bike tracks, all riding away from the scene. I feel like Dad is making a good point here, but the experts just dismiss his input because it doesn't fit with the known facts of a cat attack. But suspiciously enough, Maud and all her friends seem to be riding through the night on their bicycles. Bum bum bum! Initially, Maud's parents seem to be a bit oblivious to the changes coming over her, especially her dad, but eventually they both seem to come to realize something is going on. Oh, not at this point either, I guess. I promise he eventually gets it, maybe with a little help. This then seems to lead to her and her friends being checked into ruminations, a werepanther rehabilitation center, billed as being basically a luxury resort, but shown as being more of a woman's prison, crossed with a new agey therapy center. Maud is even forced to give up her precious kitty hat. Professor Xavier is a jerk. You're so right, Kitty Pride. Ruminations is also where this scene happens. Yeah, you're probably not seeing what the big deal is, and that's because there isn't one. But that is because this is the collected edition, and not the original issues. And so the damning nail in this series' coffin has been replaced by an innocent couplet. But originally, in place of these little lines about panthers, was an illegal reprinting of a couple tweets criticizing man-eaters for being too cisgender-centric. That is to say, this person thought that the series being too focused on a male versus female perspective was more damaging than good. This led to a massive amount of internet backlash, which is why all the misdirection and confusing plot building and open plot holes and as yet still unexplained twists are suddenly all wrapped up by explaining that the founder of Ruminations, this mustached hipster guy named Ezra, is also the owner of Estropop, who has apparently been adding in an ingredient to all his drinks that he's been convincing everyone, especially males, to drink lots of, and that ingredient is known to cause hallucinations. This apparently allowed him to convince everyone of werepantherism actually existing, especially once he faked some panther attacks in order to eliminate loose ends. At some point in the past, Ezra decided that it was his duty to help women, but it turned out women weren't particularly convinced by his obviously totally legit first run at Ruminations. So I guess, and I'm seriously having to fill in a lot of unknowns here, that he somehow found a way to gain a massive amount of money and political influence through his hallucinatory drug soda pop and convince the world of his agenda. It's honestly a bit of a stupid plot twist that might have worked if the comic had gone on longer and had more time to develop this story so that the reveal wasn't so massively sudden and left so much unexplained and unanswered. But again, the internet. I almost hate to even talk about this because honestly I'm not really qualified to address multi-gender identity issues, but I have to say I don't really understand why it came up in the first place. Yes, this comic does somewhat beg the question. I'll admit, one of my first thoughts on my first read-through was how this was affecting trans people and other non-cisgender people. It is a little frustrating for the comic to not really touch on that, but it also makes sense to me because the comic was never about that to begin with. The comic was always about a young woman growing up in a world where she felt discriminated against purely because of her gender. It's about that specific experience. That story itself grew as a reaction to the uncalled for and unreasonable negative male perspective backlash that this team's first comic got, all because those guys hadn't been reading that comic and so didn't get a single female-centric joke. But instead of trying to understand that perspective chosen for this comic, this massive backlash came about to condemn this comic for not being all things for all people, which is a ridiculous expectation to hold anything to. And honestly, why are you picking on a comic that's at least trying to do something instead of the millions of other comics out there that could more use that kind of criticism? While this isn't a perfect analogy, I feel like it would be much the same as criticizing this comic for not having superheroes in it, which, I mean, sure, you can do that, but it never claimed to be about superheroes, and so it's really not a logical complaint. Why would you complain that a comic not about superheroes doesn't work extra hard to present viewpoints for a superhero-loving audience? Are we really judging comics now for the things that they never were in the first place? People viewing my videos may disagree, but I've been trying to hold comics up to a standard not of how much I personally like them, but by how well they achieve being the thing they try to be. And the better they are at being that thing, and the more successful they are at appealing to an audience outside that group, the more likely I'm going to give them a high recommendation. Which is why I quickly moved away from a numbered rating system because it felt too much like I was judging it from too personal a perspective. So once again, with this creative team, I have the internet to thank for a fun, unique comic coming to an all too early end. Look. The internet. We need to talk. It's not me. It's you. Also, it's time for the breakdown. As I said earlier, I try to judge comics by how wide an audience they can reach, and I'd say this one must do a pretty good job, because I'm definitely not the target audience for this, but I found it to be an absolute blast. Cain's sense of humor is very entertaining, and Niemczyk's art complements it very well. I love all the building cutaway diagrams, in the graphs, and flowcharts, and not so subtle Doctor Who references, in the corgis. Oh, look at the corgis. The comic is very female and honestly feminist focused, but it was pretty obvious going in that that was going to be the case, so I can't really be that upset about it, even in the moments where it kind of feels a bit like they're trying to be mean over being funny, which doesn't really happen all that much anyway. What I can be upset about is the ending, which came on way too fast and made way too little sense and was pretty disappointing. I can also be upset that in a series only 12 issues long, 3 were essentially wasted issues. Every 4th issue, instead of releasing a comic, they basically released promotional material. Issue 4 was an issue of in-continuity cat survival magazine, Catfight. Issue 8 was the in-continuity Were-Panther puberty guide, What's Happening to Me and Can It Be Stopped? And issue 12 was Maud's Handbook for the Revolution, Scrapbook. Which, while kind of a neat idea, I could have used them doing these things for only a part of the issue, and then still having some regular comic in there. Doing this for an entire 22 pages, 3 times, felt pretty excessive. But still, overall, I would definitely give this series a recommendation level of high. The 6 actual issues we get in the first 2 volumes are some of the most fun I've had reading comics. So it's just a shame that the remaining half of the comic isn't worth getting all that excited over. The collected edition gets 2 corgis and 1 Catfight magazine. That breaks down like this. Surprisingly, no individualized names for the collections. If you don't count issues 4, 8, and 12, which I don't, then there's basically no bonus material in these collections, other than a brief alternate cover gallery in each volume and some random in-theme pages scattered about. Which ain't nothing. So I'm primarily judging them on the story, which was totes better in volumes 1 and 2. Sorry, volume 3. Thanks everybody for watching. Sorry if I seemed like I was getting up on a soapbox a lot for this episode. It's just unfortunate that with a series like this, there's really no way of discussing it without bringing up the giant elephant in the room, which is Twitter. I'll be back next week with a much less divisive comic, so make sure to stick around for that, and I hope to see you then, right here in the Comic Cave.